Yeah, thank you very much. We've now switched the microphone successfully. Thanks very much for this tour de force of the why and how of gendering macroeconomics, Özlem Onaran. And that means that we will be now moving to the discussion part and the Q&A part of tonight's plenary session. As Özlem just rightly said, the microphones will be moving around the room. So if you have any questions to our panel, please feel free to raise your hand and ask them. Who is willing to break the ice, please? We have a few questions here at the front. Yep.
Thank you for these great presentations. It was a pleasure to listen to all three of you. Diane started off saying that, suggesting that one of the reasons for why heterodox macro doesn't pick up much on feminist macro may be due to their demand side focus, the full employment focus. And then Özlem brought in the demand side and the full employment intersections with recent feminist macro work. So my question is whether you think that may be the bridge, and I will argue in the closing plenary that that has the potential to be a very strong bridge, bringing the heterodox macro and the feminist macro policy agendas together. All the findings on the ability of investing in care services with the large employment multipliers and the ability to generate jobs superior to other kinds of investments, whether that could be our bridge, connecting bridge, overlapping bridge to the heterodox macro agenda.
Thank you. Would you just pass the micro? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you also very much for this presentation. I really learned a lot and many questions, but one number I was really astonished when I think it was you, Özlem, who said that a 1% increase in public expenditure for care leads to an increase in productivity of 4.6%. And that's really an astonishing number. Could you elaborate a little bit more on the effects, how this comes about?
Thank you. I have another question just so you, yes.
All right, thank you for the wonderful presentation. My name is Dr. Freeman from the great University of Johannesburg in South Africa. So my question is, we are living in a world that is shaped by geopolitical events. Therefore, what is the transmission mechanism that is required by developing countries to develop and implement gender-inclusive macroeconomic policies? Thank you.
Thank you. We'll move back to the podium. I leave it to you how you want to start. Everybody's still finding that. And you want to start? Yeah.
Well, let me take the last question about developing gender-inclusive macroeconomic policy in South Africa and other African countries. There is actually a lot of work going on in Africa on this by African feminist economists and those working with them. So there are huge forces, ranged against this in terms of the forces that are, as in many countries, pressing for austerity policies, pressing for servicing the debt before anything else. But there are now quite a lot of feminist economists in Africa who are working on those issues. So maybe we can talk and I can give you some names of people you can contact.
Thank you. You want to speak about the bridge?
Sure. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the bringing the demand and the supply side together, I think that's a very interesting proposition in terms of this, bringing the heterodox and macro and feminist macro perspectives together. One aspect that I think is missing from that is that, I've also felt like the heterodox in terms of the building up of human capabilities, right, doesn't focus enough on the supply side, right? And the different, how I talked about, at least neoclassical economics has this notion of human capital, and that it is essential in creating productivity, for instance, and that you can get productivity improvements from investing in human capital in a completely orthodox framework. I still think that there is resistance to thinking about labor, producing labor power as productive and adding to long-term productivity growth. And so that is a challenge, I think, that remains unaddressed. And so I'd be interested to hear what you had to say about that, and maybe that segues right into what you were talking about in terms, or the question that you got about the 4.6% in productivity growth. So why don't you start there? I'm interested.
Yes. Okay. I can tell you how we get that number, and I can tell you what further research that we have to, or PhD students in the room hopefully will be doing around that. So what we do is we take the panel data of all the sectors in Britain, apart from the care sectors, so health and education left out. The rest is in the panel data. And we regress productivity, output per hours of work in each of these sectors over 50 years of data, taking long-term averages or long-term differences and so on usual determinants of productivity from a Keynesian Kaldor-Verdorn perspective, and add to that not just the sector's own private investment, but also public investment in the economy in aggregate, in two separate areas. One is the care spending of the public sector. Well, it is dubbed as current spending. We call it social infrastructure or care investment by the public sector. It's simply your current spending by the government in health and social care and education sectors, all aggregated. And public gross fixed capital formation. These are same variables for all the sectors. Elissa knows it very well because it got published in Feminist Economics and in a different extension with wealth effects in Cambridge Journal of Economics too. We care for usual econometric issues of endogeneity, using instrumental variables and all that. And then we look at what is the effect of public spending on productivity. And then there is the whole macro simulation going on, because whatever public spending is happening is, of course, affecting the aggregate output in the economy. It is affecting different types of spending, it's affecting productivity, it's affecting employment. So combine all these simulations and you get it's not just one econometric estimation, but using those parameters and other sides of the full estimation of the model, where we have obviously consumption effects coming from government spending of the households in different sectors, hence the gendered multipliers. There are different investment effects. There are effects on net exports. Put all these together, we get the 4.6%, which is very high. The why is all blah, blah, blah, hence speculation. It's not unimportant. I'm not looking down on the idea of conceptually, I think, trying to understand what are the channels, but I think this is where I really would like to see new research being done. Micaela Fernandez, who is in the audience as well, our PhD student, hopefully is interested in looking at that and also comparing the global north and the south. No pressure, Mika, you have all the time, 4 years ahead of you to come up with the numbers and present here, but I'm very interested in understanding the time difference. Childcare. The effect of that has an immediate effect on women, because I would be able to go and work, and that would probably increase aggregate productivity in the rest of the economy if I don't have to provide supervisory childcare at home. Provided that I have enough time still to provide emotional care for the child, because otherwise you won't get a socially talented person growing up. On the other hand, the impact of childcare provision by the government would have, or early childhood education will have tremendous effects 20 years on those children. There is very interesting anecdotal evidence around that forthcoming, I should say. Ignacio Pinto is writing a policy brief for Women's Budget Group, looking at how public spending on childcare does lead to better outcomes. But this will be a 20-year horizon. Whereas if you provide better healthcare, you would get immediate effects, obviously. What is the effect of long-term elderly care? That is, again, very complicated. It is likely to be very short-run and immediate for those people who would otherwise have to be caring full-time, again, supervisory care for the elderly if there is not adequate provision of social care. But there are very sophisticated, I think, impacts that would come from knowing, as an adult person who doesn't need elderly care, who is also not caring for another elderly person, if I know I will be cared for, I would be a more secure person, and hopefully we would have a stronger social fabric. These are all words from Diane, by the way, who has very eloquently written all that. We have not empirically pinned these effects down, and I think this is moving forward. We have to make a stronger case for business case of care is productive work. You've got to invest in care, otherwise you're not going to have a productive economy or an industrial policy. To do that, I believe in the power of numbers. Well, we have one aggregate number, but your question is spot on the how question. Yes, I would like to say a few things on the global inequalities dimension of that, but I think I will just say we need to think about international policy coordination and opening the fiscal space in the global south, and that requires talking about tax coordination, capital controls, debt cancellation, an active technology transfer in the form of development aid, but also we should stop doing austerity here. That alone will extend the fiscal space in the global south. But of course, very important issues there.
Elissa, you want to add to
Can
this?
I just one follow-up to what Özlem was saying? I mean, it's really interesting to hear you talk about the specification, and you know, I hate to be sort of a defender of neoclassical macro, but you know, to just note that endogenous growth models where technological innovation is endogenous and it's directly dependent on education investments in human capital. I mean, you have models that exist which are consistent with something like this. So that's another, you know, I think reason to approach this from a hybrid perspective. Like, we don't need to invent everything. There's some really good work that already exists, right, which is consistent with the kind of thing that you're talking about, as well as investing in early childhood education, right? We know that there has been tremendous work that Karen Groen and others have facilitated. I can't think, my jet lag is coming to me, but so I can't think of this person's name. But there is a body of empirical work that has looked over time at the returns to investments in early childhood education. So,
Thank you.
what's that? Yes, thank you, James Heckman. Who does really great work around this issue. Yeah.
Thank you. We have time for another round of questions, and you need to put your hands up very clearly. The lights are very bright, so please, we have one here at the front.
Simon Wong.
Hi, thank you very much. I've got a question that's for all three speakers. You've talked engagingly and very well about gendering macroeconomic policy and gendering macroeconomic models, but none of you have talked about gendering macroeconomic theory. Is that because you think theory and models are the same thing, or is there some other reason?
Thank you. Do we have more questions? Yes, please. Is there another one on the right? My right? Yes, it's coming.
Thank you. I just want to ask that because you guys talked about the past 30 years and the progress gender has made, now with upcoming populist regimes globally, right-wing and religious governments, how do you see the next 30 years? Will the progress on gender actually advance, or will we backtrack on some progress that we've made? We've already seen US pulling out of development with the US aid and a lot of gender programs and how Trump talks about gender. I mean, it's embarrassing. So yeah, your perspective on the next 30 years, can you do some predictions? Thank you.
Thanks a lot. We could take a third question if there is one. Yes, please, at the front.
Hi, just a quick question. Following up on the 30 years and the gloomy outlook. Feminist economics is also coming out of the women's peace movement, so we should integrate our thinking about gender, feminist economics, and war and conflict resolution.
Thank you very much. So I'll move back to the podium now. Do you want to start?
I can start, yes. Thanks for the final point on bringing in a feminist perspective to peace. It was actually something I wanted to say. It was in my slides and I had to rush over that and didn't mention, but a feminist ecological post-Keynesian agenda would also mean that, well, some things will grow, renewable energy, care economy, public transport, and it leads to a lot of demand and a lot of activity. But if you're serious about climate change, some things have to degrow too, and of course, I have a list of wish list of things to degrow. I'm not interested in what will happen eventually to GDP, but I'm interested in what's happening to emissions. So, in addition to fossil fuel sector, of course, the military-industrial complex is something for me that needs to degrow. That takes a very different twist now with all the, of course, military powers making us watch wars on live television every night in the news. It has taken a very different turn after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. However, you know, looking back to genocide in Palestine, again, we have to stop producing and exporting these weapons. To Israel, we have to really degrow military weapons, and if you still have some need for defense, it has to probably rely on a lot more, you know, defense as opposed to offensive weaponization. So it is very much in the spirit of a feminist ecological utopian thinking for me, talking about demilitarization or degrowing that sector. Of course, the pronatalism that comes in this new era of authoritarian regimes, that's really going back to the worst nightmares of our history. And hence, for me, I think public provision of care as opposed to baby bonuses is one of the key issues around that. Or talking about okay, it may sound a little bit technical now, but endogeneity of gender norms and endogeneity of occupational segregation, because gender norms are socially constructed. Gender is a socially constructed term. It's not a biological term. All these are very important, and it took almost a new revolutionary meaning when you have Trump, who is really making the life of people working in publicly funded areas a nightmare, because the word gender all of a sudden became the most illegal word that you can use in the US. And we often say in Turkey, the Turkish neoliberals wanted to make Turkey small America, and we're saying, oh, now Trump is making America a big Turkey. So it's not like a big surprise or something that I have never seen in my personal life as a person born and bred in Turkey, but yes, it's back into the forefront, ranging from Hungary to Turkey to the US and or Russia for that matter. Okay. Simon, I think it's fair to say people talk from their experience. I'm a person with interest in producing models that can be tested. And that's my liking. So I found there was a tone of a bit of too much criticism, I think, undertone in your question. So I will not answer, but I talked from my experience. You might think about it too much, reducing theory to models, but yeah. I won't apologize for that because someone needs to model and then test them, and that's a useful way of theorizing, I believe.
Thank you. Diane, do you want to continue? Yeah.
Okay, I'll go next. I wasn't totally sure what you had in mind, Simon, but one of the things you might have had in mind was something we didn't talk about. It's true, although I think all of us have written stuff about it elsewhere, which a system which is dominated by finance, how the tension between that and the issues to do with the reproduction of labor that we've been talking about, and the tremendous mismatch, and that's, I slightly talked about it, pointed to, and I talked about the contradictions, a mismatch in terms of time, fundamental differences in the modalities of time in the reproduction of labor. It's not reversible time in the reproduction of labor. In money markets, everything flows are reversible. When you're talking about reproduction of labor, they're not. So there's a huge the mismatches that we've already talked about in terms of time scale. A day is a long time in the financial markets, but a day is a tiny speck of time in the human life. So there's a huge mismatch there in terms of time frames and time horizons for decision making. And risk, I think, the issues of risk, which also links to reversibility, the fact that, and here there's obviously parallels with ecological thinking about the kinds of that are not reversible, that are not recoverable. And there's obviously a huge mismatch between those kind of concerns and the way that financial systems operate and the intensification of the dominance of finance. And Nilofer and I we do have a diagram that tries to capture a little bit of that in an article in the second issue of the World Development 2000, but we didn't elaborate it a lot, but there's one of the chapters in the Reader that I've just brought out, which is a republication of an article about these issues of risk and who bears the risk if you compare how the financial systems operate with how labor is reproduced. And Jeff Powell and Jeff is a colleague of Özlem's at Greenwich, have just had an article accepted by feminist economics on engendering monetary policy, where we're trying to grapple with some of these things. So if your question, Simon, was about this issue of how do we understand how these real, the financial forces and the power of finance and the way that constrains and shapes the kinds of investment that are forthcoming, of the kinds that we've talked about, and how they constrain that and how they destroy the possibilities of that. I think that's an important question, and I think there is work going on that.
Thank you. You want to finish?
So thank you for responding in terms of theory versus modeling, but I think to pick up, and maybe this will also be a bit of a response to that, to pick up the question about autocratic regimes and making predictions about the next 30 years, I certainly won't do that. But I think, that fundamentally, you know, and this is, I've done some of this work theoretically, thinking that underlies the macroeconomic model is thinking about patriarchy, right, as a system of production and reproduction that long predates capitalism and interacts with it in both complementary and contradictory ways. So for instance, in other work that I've done, thinking about patriarchal production as a continuum and complicating some of what I presented this afternoon before this panel, but you have a sort of more gender egalitarian distribution of the responsibility for social reproduction. But then on the other side, you have a more patriarchal one that can manifest in a couple of ways. One is through this feminization of responsibility and obligation, where women as a class are taking up the time and financial costs of social reproduction. But another manifestation is traditional patriarchy, right? Where in exchange for maintaining traditional sources of male power, there's also, to an extent, a fulfillment of the traditional patriarchal obligation to the social reproductive side of the economy, right? In the sense of the baby bonds that you were talking about, or traditional marriage where women, right, stay home. And there's a traditional sexual division of labor where women provide social reproduction time, but men provide the financing. And so I see that, you know, patriarchal benefits and costs manifest in these different ways, and is very much, I think, a theoretical stance on the macro manifestations of relations between genders.
Thank you very much. We would have time for one very quick round. If there's important questions, I have one hand there, so please. Maybe 1 second if you want to think about it very quickly.
Thank you. I don't think this is working.
Please, go ahead.
So I wanted to ask that, since we've been talking now about practice more than theory, and I can't help but think, as a woman from Pakistan, that all these countries, Iran, Afghanistan, Sudan, India, Yemen, Saudi Arabia, I could keep naming them, right? Do you guys consider these as outliers and they're eliminated from the practical theories? Or no disrespect intended, but like, is this another instance of white feminism where whatever goes on in the global south is irrelevant and we continue discussing? Because these topics have not, or these countries and Afghanistan, for instance, Iran, for instance, they've pushed women back to the Stone Ages, and none of the migration agencies, none of the refugees agencies have adequately put in action what's going on in Sudan, how women were treated in Palestine. None of this sort of, when I look at it as a woman from Global South, it seems like nobody in the Global North cares. So what would your perspectives be on that? And how do we then talk about macroeconomics and gendering and inclusivity if the conditions in the Global South keep deteriorating and the North keeps improving, however, whatever? It's not very, I'm still thinking out loud, so I hope you guys understand the question and the place that I'm coming from. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. And one final question at the front. Jan?
I have a question that came up to me while you were talking, and I mean it positively. A key question would be, if it could be positively answered from a gender perspective, or feminist perspective, is patriarchy growth enhancing in history, in the present, in developed societies, in underdeveloped societies? My first approach would be patriarchy, or less patriarchy, is growth enhancing. However, when we have, because of labor market participation of women, however, in modern societies we have not the same labor participation of men and women, but quite similar in the meantime. So can we say it still today, say for the German or British economy, that less patriarchy is, or gendering the economy, is growth enhancing?
Thank you.
Yes or not? And for developing countries, I suppose it is quite different and very clear-cut.
Thank you. I have a promise of a very short question to your left. Am I right? Yes.
Thank you. I mean, you've been talking a little bit about how difficult it has been to engender macro, especially from a heterodox tradition. I feel that through orthodox tradition, it has been a little easier even.
Yes.
And I don't know, just maybe I want to hear some final comment on, like, I feel this is a great opportunity for us, really. This could be a turning point. So what can be said to the audience, heterodox economists, on if they're not there yet, like on how they can use this conference to think a little bit more on how to engender their own work and not only know how we've been engendering it. Thank you.
Thank you. Shall we move in reverse order? Elissa, do you want to start?
Sure.
Thank you.
So I'll take the last question. I think first, I think that I think taking labor as a produced means of production, for me, is a key place to start in terms of heterodox. The question about is patriarchy growth enhancing or growth inhibiting, I think it depends. It depends on the structure of the economy and its context in the global economy, right? We have instances in feminist macro work where patriarchy can be very complementary to growth, right? The work of Stephanie Seguino and how gender wage gaps and the crowding of women into certain economic sectors constitute a competitive global advantage for export-oriented economies, right? So that really contributes to economic growth. But then in later stages of development, inequality in labor force participation and health and education, right, really detract from growth. So it really depends. In that sense, right, that's another reason I think it's important to think about patriarchy as a system that is independent of capitalism or other systems of production. In terms of the first very important question about the Global South, I mean, most of my macro modeling work has been done in the context of the Global South, Global South countries and the challenges of development. I didn't get to talk a lot about it in this particular panel, but I also think, as you emphasize, that there's a lot of diversity in the Global South, right? It's not just one situation, but you brought up a very challenging prospect, which is how to apply this kind of analysis or the utility of this kind of analysis in the context of violence and conflict in particular. And that's something that is very challenging, and my work has not addressed that, although it has addressed the different manifestations of patriarchy across different countries and how that interacts with sort of standard macroeconomic structures and conditions of growth. So one example might be countries that are very plentiful in natural resources, right, have not had the same kind of increases in women's labor force participation as countries that have fewer natural resources. And one of the consequences for that in terms of social norms is that there has not been the kind of indigenous, or not indigenous, but I'm getting jet lagged here, but there hasn't been the kind of grassroots challenge to traditional gender norms because of women's not increasing their labor force participation, so higher persistence of traditional family structures despite increases in wealth. That's an example of that kind of application. Sorry to take so long.
The first challenging question about, how does any of this relevant to countries which are in disintegration and conflict? It's a good question. You can pose it to any kind of economics. How is any of the kind of economic analysis and modeling and data work and theory done by people in this conference, how does it help us when we're talking about social breakdown, war, and violence? I think we've got some sessions on conflict and inflation, but I'm not sure even they're really talking about what happens when we have got actually a complete depletion. I mean, this is where I would refer to my concept of depletion of human capabilities. We're talking about countries which are suffering a most extreme depletion of human capabilities. So first we have to name that and say, this is what's happening. And it's not something that can easily be recovered from. And then we have to think about why is it happening? And then we have to think about what kinds of policies would we advocate for? And what are the barriers to those policies actually being implemented? There are huge, huge barriers. So I think that's why I find useful about thinking about the depletion of labor. I mean, it's a macroeconomic way of trying to frame this, because that's what we were asked to talk about in this session, about macroeconomics as an object of consideration. But I think that linking it to the devastation, the breaking of the social fabric and the depletion of labor in terms of thinking about it in macroeconomics, I mean, the destruction of human lives is what you're talking about. And that's not something we can easily we're doing our modeling in universities, but removed from those desperate situations of people in Sudan, for instance. But I think, how can we bring our thinking to bear on those kind of desperate situations? So I think I would reach then for thinking about what are the forces driving the depletion of labor? Is there any possibility of recovery? What would be needed for any recovery to take place? And yeah, I think, and the question about patriarchy and growth, I think Elissa's answered that quite a lot. But I think it depends what dimension of patriarchy. Mm-hmm. I think when talking with Stephanie Seguino and people from South Korea about her work there, it was just, okay, the way to grow in the way that South Korea did, educate your women, close the gender gap in education, really educate your women, but don't close the gender gap in wages. Keep the wages, the wages of the women low, so as to provide the incentive for the first phase of industrialization. So it wasn't a simple answer, because it depended on which kind of dimension of gender inequality you were taking into account.
Thank you.
Oh, well, very briefly, though, while there is the gap you have identified when it comes to countries you named, Iran, Sudan, Pakistan, the positive news is there is actually quite a lot of work that is being done in feminist macro that, İpek Karajan and colleagues for a ILO report that Valeria Escuel has actually really initiated, has looked at 45 countries in the world about the impact of improving the care sector and the working conditions of the care workers and its effect on job creation. So, or if you look at the Levy Institute models, they are applying to countries like Ghana, Kenya, broadly speaking, low-income economies. Gemini have looked at 8 economies for International Trade Union Confederation, and those were including countries like Turkey, Philippines, South Africa, Chile, Colombia, and if I have forgotten one country that's in the paper. Obviously, there is a critical mass of women who work on feminist macro and gender budgeting, for example, from Turkey in this conference. Quite a lot of papers on that. That doesn't still excuse why there is less work that has been done on the countries you have named. The patriarchy-led growth, or is it impeding or enhancing growth? A very good question, Jan. This is what we try to call as gender equality-led growth or gender inequality-led growth. We tried to operationalize it for 2 countries, Turkey and Korea. What we found was actually both were driven by gender equality rather than gender inequality. It depends on the parameters of the economy, structural features of the economy, including gender structural features, but also other structural features in terms of import structure, oligopoly structure, and so on. What I should though say is, whatever we found, the one finding still remains: impact of distribution on growth, positive or negative, is always very small. So we care about it, but I started to say improving equality won't impede growth, even if you're in an inequality-led parametric setting. However, it also won't be the drivers of growth. The driver of growth will really come from, I think, investment, and public investment is the locomotive of that. So yes, it's an interesting question. It's neither or, because the impact is small. The way to positively formulate it is we can actually fight inequalities, and if we combine it with a massive mobilization, big push in public investment, we can manage all, and we know how to do that, so there is the future. But yeah, while the question is important, and I think I care a lot about your question, the impacts, I think the one thing that we can agree on will always be small. And therefore, we can stop worrying about profit-led, wage-led, gender equality-led, or gender inequality-led. We can achieve equality, and we have to push for public investment to really make everything else work for the economy.
Thank you so much. And with that, we will replenish our labor power for tomorrow.
Oh, she did. Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, well, you will finish, you'll discuss this over dinner, because we all are now going to make sure that we are well fed and rested tomorrow and move off to dinner. Thank you all very much for being here.
Thank you for the very nice chairing with letting us run over 15 minutes.